For most of his life, Lyndon McLELLAN had been in the business of country stores, the type of stores where the employees know the customers' names by heart and workers remain loyal for years and years. Business has been good for McLELLAN. "It's my livelihood," he told the Daily Signal. "This is all I know how to do. I'm 50 years old, and if I had to do something else, I'd probably be in trouble. This is what I was brought up in. This is all I know." What McLELLAN didn't know, though, was that the federal government could come in and take away what he'd worked so hard for. On a summer day last July, McLELLAN, who hadn't yet arrived at the store, received a phone call from one of the employees summoning him to the L&M. More than a dozen federal agents had flooded into his business, officers from North Carolina's Alcohol and Law Enforcement, the Police Department, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and they were asking for him. When McLELLAN arrived at the store, he met two federal agents dressed in suits who asked to speak with him in private. McLELLAN led the agents to L&M's stockroom, where they asked him if he knew of the term structuring. He had no idea. The federal agents then showed McLELLAN paperwork that included deposits to the store's accounts at Lumbee Guaranty Bank. The statement showed two deposits made within a 24-hour period totaling $11,400. The statements, they say, indicated he had a history of consistent cash deposits of less than $10,000, which is illegal. Then the agents told the small business owner something that shook him to his core and should shake all of us to our core, ladies and gentlemen. The federal government, the Internal Revenue Service criminals, had seized all of the money in L&M's bank account, $107,702.66. They even took the change, ladies and gentlemen. It's unbelievable, but this is what's going on in America. This is not an uncommon thing. Though he didn't know it at the time, McLELLAN committed structuring violations when making cash deposits of less than $10,000. McLELLAN himself doesn't handle the deposit. That's his niece's responsibility. And a bank teller had previously advised her to make the deposits of less than that amount. If cash deposits totaled more than $10,000, the bank had additional paperwork to file, the teller said. How nice. So the teller helped the feds in their app basically to ultimately take this gentleman's savings, his business's savings. $107,000 is no joke. No joke. Structuring laws were originally put into place to catch drug trafficking and money laundering, but more and more instances have arisen where innocent Americans have committed structuring violations without even knowing it. For unknowingly committing a crime, a structured violation, the government seized all of the money in McLELLAN's bank accounts by using a section of civil asset forfeiture laws that regulate cash deposits. Now, I'm a little more concerned with the reason why they're going after, middle-income America again, when Wachovia and Wells Fargo were fined a mere $200 million, none of their assets seized, for laundering $379 billion of drug money. Bank of America has been caught as well. All of the banks. Why do we not seize their assets? Why do we not demand that all of the assets of these banks be seized and pay our national debt? Or better yet, distribute all the money. They want to have wealth distribution? Distribute the money to every American evenly. How about that? Civil asset forfeiture is a procedure that allows law enforcement to seize property if it's suspected of being related to a crime. The practice began decades ago with phony good intentions. However, now, and this is something that is not reported in the lamestream news, law enforcement agencies have been using civil asset forfeiture to seize property and money for profit. Racketeers! They're racketeers! They're criminals! They are criminals. In recent years, seizures executed because of structuring violations have increased dramatically. In 2005, the IRS made just 114 structuring seizures. By 2012, that number had risen to 639. 6 times the amount. In recent years, seizures executed because of structuring violations have increased dramatically. In 2005, the Illuminati Revenue Service made just 114 structuring seizures. By 2012, that number had risen to 639. 6 times the amount. During that same period, the agency seized $242 million for structuring violations. While banks must submit reports to the Department of Treasury for cash deposits of more than $10,000, the government also receives suspicious activity reports on deposits below that threshold. It's likely the government received a suspicious activity report detailing McLELLAN's deposits, which is how he came into the government's radar. Unbelievable. The IRS frequently teams up with law enforcement to look through suspicious activity reports. By seizing property and money through the Department of Justice Equitable Sharing Program, the law enforcement agencies share in the proceeds of the forfeiture. The IRS deputizes these local law enforcement officers to go through suspicious activity reports and to identify cases where people are subject to forfeiture. In other words, let's find some people we can steal all their assets from, further diminishing the population of the middle class, bringing them into poverty and hardship so the elite can continue to grow their wealth, which continues unabated despite all of these lying liberals like Hillary Clinton, multi-millionaire Hillary Clinton saying, oh, we're trying to help the poor and the middle class. They're trying to help themselves, ladies and gentlemen. Make no mistake about that. The government has a financial incentive to broadly apply these forfeiture laws, so said McLELLAN's attorney, a lawyer for the Institute of Justice, Robert Johnson. When an agency like the IRS takes money under the forfeiture laws, that money goes back into the pockets of the agency and is available to the IRS to fund law enforcement activities without appropriation from Congress. It's a powerful incentive for law enforcement to abuse civil forfeiture laws. Remember how they're all saying you're going to have to wait for your refund because of the cuts to the IRS? Let's end the IRS. We don't need the IRS. We had a Treasury Department. We don't need the Federal Reserve. We don't need any of this. We can print money made out of nothing without interest. Not as they charge interest and then add to our debt. The Federal Reserve and the IRS are nothing but collectivist organizations owned by the global elite. They're not even Americans that own these organizations. They're private corporations owned by central banks who are owned by the 13 top families, the 13 Illuminati bloodline families. And this is just the way it is. And now, in California, cities are making millions seizing property and money from law-abiding citizens. Clustered in areas around Los Angeles County, people are seeing their property and money seized through civil asset forfeiture, and it's making police departments tens of millions of dollars. California has safeguards in place to protect innocent people from the harmful practices of civil asset forfeiture. However, a new report from the Drug Policy Alliance found that such measures haven't stopped law enforcement agencies from using federal forfeiture laws to circumvent state policies. The Drug Policy Alliance, an organization focused on drug policy reforms, examined the cities that lead California in seizures per capita. The cities: Baldwin Park, Beverly Hills, what a shock, Gardenia, Irwindale, Laverne, Pomona, Southgate, Vernon, and West Covina are all located around Los Angeles County and collected more than $43 million in revenue from forfeitures between 2006 and 2013. We use federal forfeiture, Baldwin Park Police Captain David Reynoso told the Drug Policy Alliance. It's just more beneficial to us. Baldwin Park has a population of 75,000, and it collected $4.9 million in federal forfeiture revenue from 2006 to 2013 and participated in 565 seizures between 2008 and 2013. The city of Irwindale, meanwhile, saw $802,000 in revenue from Justice Department forfeiture program, and it now has a population of only 1,400 people. According to the Drug Policy Alliance findings, law enforcement agencies in the California cities studied use revenue from civil asset forfeiture to pay for overtime, communications, and computers, and to purchase and maintain vehicles. Welcome to the rising police state and how they're funding it, ladies and gentlemen. It's not bad enough that the military has given all their surplus to the cities, and we have police departments that look like we look like a third world country now. If somebody, the SWAT team arrives and they're all dressed in army fatigues, all ready to battle with the people, against the people. We have an incredible increase in all of this tactical warfare against the American people, and now they're preparing for the Jade Helm 15. And even the media is trying to like downplay it and call us all crazy for being concerned about this. Well, are you concerned about this? Are you concerned about all this forfeiture of property that has no justification, that circumvents laws, that is in violation of the Constitution, first of all? But again, this is nothing new. This is nothing new. Here is a clip from 1996. Aaron Russo had a very short-lived cable show called Mad as Hell.
Recently, the Associated Press reported the results of a national poll asking Americans if they trusted their government. 70% did not. One of the reasons this figure is so high is people are becoming more aware that we have all but lost our rights to due process and the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. A man's home is no longer his castle. Tonight's show is going to focus on asset forfeiture. Using that catchphrase, government agencies can lawfully storm your residence and seize all your assets. That includes your home and your bank accounts. Last year there were over 250,000 asset forfeitures. That's 5,000 every week. And 80% of those victims were never charged with a crime, much less proven guilty of anything. And in some cases, people were even killed in the process.
Captain DeWitt here.
Yeah.
I'm on a search warrant with the Hidden Hills crew on this marijuana eradication thing.
Yes.
And they just, looks like 927D here.
At the location?
Yeah.
Somebody there?
No, we put him down.
We killed him?
Yeah.
It's scary, you know. I never, ever would have thought that I would witness my husband executed, literally executed, third world country style.
Donald Scott died in his living room on October 2nd, 1992, gunned down by police. Now, his widow says that Donald was the victim of a law that makes the seizure of private land so financially attractive to law enforcement agencies that they have begun to assume private citizens guilty till proven innocent.
The story begins here at Trails End Ranch, 200 acres in Malibu, California. Current value $5 million. Landowner Donald Scott was a multi-millionaire due to a family inheritance. He was handsome, prosperous, and married to Frances Plant, a woman half his age. But their passion for each other blinded them to age differences.
I would tell him he's 61 going on 16. He had so much energy, and he was just so much fun to be around. We had the best time. We just had a ball. I don't think any two people have ever been happier.
But their idyllic life at Trails End soon became a Gothic nightmare.
Good morning. I'd like to welcome you all to Rancho Sierra Vista Sat Weewha on behalf of the National Park Service.
In the 30 years since Donald Scott purchased his ranch, the National Park Service had bought up every available land parcel surrounding Trails End, making Scott's land a choice morsel for federal acquisition. The Park Service judged Trails End crucial to complete its federal land acquisitions agenda. Friends say that the Park Service had approached Donald repeatedly about selling, but he refused.
Donald always had a feeling that the government would do something, or the national park wanted this land to the point of where they would do anything to get this land, even kill him.
Ironically, Scott predicted his own death, but it was not by the Park Service. 2 years ago, the LA County Sheriff's Department claimed they had received an anonymous tip about Trails End Ranch. Captain Larry Waldy ran the narcotics unit at the time.
We then got a tip from a reliable informant that, in fact, that marijuana, large amounts of marijuana were growing there.
It was 1993. LA County was in fiscal crisis. Law enforcement budgets were scant, and like other agencies, The sheriff's department was scrambling for extra funds. More and more, they were forced to rely on the proceeds of drug busts to supplement crippled budgets. In effect, our civil servants became revenue producers.
Discovering drugs on private land allows a law enforcement agency to seize the property, sell it, and take the profits. That is called asset forfeiture. It is highly controversial in that it gives an incentive to law enforcement agencies to say that drugs exist, to pretend that drugs exist, even when there aren't any.
Financially motivated to confirm the anonymous tip, Deputy Sheriff Gary Spencer ordered aerial reconnaissance, and DEA agent Charles Stowell complied. In a fly over the ranch, he claimed he saw 50 marijuana plants attached to lines suspended from tree branches.
There is virtually no way that Stowell could have seen through that canopy of trees. It's like a rainforest. It's impenetrable.
Michael Bradbury is district attorney for Ventura County. His investigators studied the Scott case for months. Their findings were explosive, concluding the L.A. Sheriff's Department was motivated in part to seize the ranch for the government.
I think Agent Stowell was under tremendous pressure from the Los Angeles Sheriff's Office in the person of Deputy Spencer to come up with the opinion that marijuana was being cultivated on the ranch. As a matter of fact, after Stowell initially said that he had seen marijuana, he called Spencer back and said, "I am not comfortable with you using my name, and you have to corroborate me."
Despite Agent Stowell's reservations, the Sheriff's Department marshaled ground teams from the National Park Service and the Border Patrol. But even their ground surveillance turned up no marijuana. Nevertheless, law enforcement still commandeered a search warrant and ordered the troops to move in.
27 people were at the scene. There were at least 5 different agencies. You had the National Park Service there because we worked with them in dealing with the marijuana eradication program. LAPD was there and DEA was there. Coupled with that is the National Guard that we worked with.
There was a crash and the house started shaking. And when I first realized it wasn't an earthquake, and I saw a man's face looking at me through the window. Here these men come running towards me, and I'm backing into my living room, screaming, "Don't shoot me, don't kill me." My husband heard me, and he came out into the living room screaming, "Francis, are you all right?" And he had his gun pointed up in the air, and he looked at me, and they yelled, "Put your gun down, put your gun down, put your gun down." And that was the last thing he said, and they just murdered him. This picture of these men was taken moments after they killed him by their own sheriff's department, and they're smiling like I don't know what.
The troops searched the entire property, including a grove of trees where the 50 marijuana plants were allegedly spotted by aerial reconnaissance. And there was no marijuana.
But we found some lines suggesting the block and tackle method on some of the trees in that general vicinity.
There's no evidence that there were ropes and lines there.
I will never be able to be convinced they came here to serve a search warrant.
So why did 5 government agencies storm the house that morning? Was the raid on Donald Scott's property part of a government conspiracy to obtain his land for the Park Service under asset forfeiture laws? Does that sound too far-fetched to you? Not if you consider the findings of the DA's office.
Curiously, the district attorney's investigation yielded these documents. They were passed out during a briefing before the raid. A property appraisal of the 200-acre ranch and a map, including a notation by Agent Stowell that a neighboring 80-acre parcel had recently sold for $800,000. The district attorney doesn't understand why a search for drugs would include such information unless seizing Scott's land was law enforcement's motive.
I think this is simply a case of a good officer, very aggressive, who lost his moral compass, saw an opportunity to have his star rise rapidly in the department by seizing a significant asset.
In fact, current Park Service land acquisition policies across the United States are under scrutiny, considered heavy-handed, and in some cases illegal. As for Donald's murder, Frances insists that her husband was in the process of lowering his gun when he was shot.
It was just pointed up in the air. He didn't have a chance to obey their deadly command of put your gun down anyway. They just blew him away.
And Frances's nightmare just kept getting worse. Months after Donald's murder, the ranch house burned down. Frances says it may have been arson.
The house is burned down because the national park refused to let the Ventura Fire Department put out the fire. They could have made a very simple fire break. They had all their equipment there just to make one little fire break, and the national park stopped them. They said it is against our park policy to disturb the natural beauty of our park land. And now, guess what? Now the IRS wants to force a sale of this land to make us pay death taxes.
So let me get this right. One agency of the government comes in and kills your husband, and now that he's dead, another agency of the government comes in and wants the land.
Well, they haven't met me yet. They're not going to get this land. I couldn't believe this could happen in our country. I couldn't believe my father has fought in 2 wars for us to be safe in our homes. And for this to happen in America it's unbelievable.
That piece was absolutely frightening. And the fact that the 2 deputies who shot Donald Scott are still in service only goes to prove the point that the government is unaccountable. We are very fortunate to have with us on today's show 3 of America's foremost experts on asset forfeiture. Brenda Grantland is a graduate of George Washington University's Law School. She presently serves on the board of directors of FEAR, Forfeiture Endangers American Rights. And Jeffrey Steinborn is a graduate of Yale Law School and a prominent Seattle attorney who specializes in asset forfeitures. Judy Osborne is a hooker from Santa Monica Boulevard. No, I'm just kidding. I'm sorry. A little.
You have your asset seized for that.
Have your asset seized for that, too. There you go. Judy Osborne is the author of Spectre of Forfeiture. She defeated the government's attempted forfeiture of her home and now edits the FEAR Chronicles. Is what happened to Donald Scott a rare occurrence?
Many of the things that happen to Donald Scott happen every day. There are people that are getting killed because of the war on drugs and because police want to seize their house. There are many instances where the police lie to obtain a search warrant. And there are many times when the raids are made on places where no crime is being committed.
Mm-hmm. So how does civil forfeiture differ from criminal prosecution?
It's so easy to forfeit something civilly. All they have to do is say that we want it and come and get it. And at that point it becomes your burden, you the property owner's burden, to hire an attorney if you can find one who understands the law and to go there and prove that the government doesn't have a right to your property. So it's enormously different. Really all the government has to do is wish for it and it's theirs until you can go try to get it back, which is very difficult.
Wait, are you saying to me that under civil forfeiture the government doesn't have to prove anything?
No.
There's no due process of law?
No, that's correct. That's what I'm saying.
So
they can seize your property based on hearsay, and hearsay is really nothing more than a police officer standing in front of a judge and swearing to something for which he's not accountable. And that's enough to get the papers to seize your house. Then you have to go back to court and try to prove that your house or your property is not tainted by some unlawful conduct.
So how does do the police or the authorities decide whether a case is civil or criminal?
Well, I think nowadays they have to think more seriously about criminal because of some new developments in the law. But up until about a year ago, the courts had ruled that civil forfeiture of your property was not punishment, and therefore the government didn't have to follow the usual rules that they have to follow when they try to punish you for committing a crime.
So if the authorities have the option of saying this is criminal or civil, they can always say it's civil because it's easier for them to take it.
Absolutely easier. And that's what they do, and that's why for the last 10 years the government civil forfeiture program has really been running amok. What you have here is the government, well, the looters are in the wheelhouse, and they're using the government as a way to loot the country. And the result of it is that the police in situations like this really run around like children without adult supervision, taking what they want. In about 90% of the cases, there is no recourse. The property's gone, and whatever rights may have been violated along the way are simply ignored. Fortunately, assassinations are rare, but they're certainly not unheard of, and I'm sure we haven't seen the last of them.
So they can, if they want to, they can just come in and say that they can just plant evidence and say...
They can do that too, but they don't have to. They don't need evidence. They don't
need evidence.
They need a cop. We all know how honest cops are. They need a cop who's ready to swear that somebody reliable told him or her that there's pot in your house, or that you sold some drugs or committed some crime, and that the fruits of that crime are invested into your real estate or in your bank account.
So if some informant says Aaron Russo is growing marijuana in his backyard, and the cops come and raid my house, they can seize my home, my bank accounts, based on the fact that some informant said that.
That's correct.
An informant who stands to gain 25% of your seized assets.
Whoa! Wait a minute. No! You mean the informant gets a piece of this action?
Yes, either in reduced jail time in some cases, but most often up to 25% of the forfeited assets.
It's right there in the statute.
It's right there in the statute, yes.
So I'm going to call up on everybody in here. Hey! This one. Let's seize their house. I'm getting 25% of that?
And it places the owner in the untenable situation of trying to prove a negative. I challenge anybody here to prove there was no marijuana in your closet on this day 2 years ago. Prove it.
That's the scary part about it, and what's happened. You know, Aaron, we've been talking about the Constitution, but this demonstrates very clearly the Constitution is what the judges say it is. And if the judges say this is constitutional, then it is. And so one of the problems really is that the judges, we have to have some judges who have the courage to talk about what your rights are and to be offended by this.
But the Constitution is very plain English. It's not very difficult to understand.
Well, you would think so, but historically it's always been nothing more than what the judges say it is. And this generation of judges seems to have a low esteem for some of these rights that we hold so dear.
So who's vulnerable to forfeiture? Like
everyone.
Anybody.
You know, there are lots of cases now where third parties are having their assets seized because of something someone else did. Say a landlord-tenant situation, for example. You may own an apartment building and someone living in your apartment may be selling drugs. The police will come to you and say, get that tenant out of there within 2 weeks or we'll take your property. And you go to your lawyer, you find out that the local landlord-tenant law requires you to give your tenant due process. So you start going through the due process that you're required to give under the local landlord-tenant law, and that's not fast enough. They come in and seize your property. There's a couple in Southern California, retired Army, I forget his office. He was an officer, and this was his retirement property, and he lost his entire rental property because he couldn't get the tenant out fast enough to please the cops.
If you're a landlord, the situation's even more frightening than that because they can search your rental property illegally. Just kick the door down without a warrant. And if they find something growing there, then they can seize the house. And you, the owner, the landlord, don't have the right to object to the illegal search because you weren't living there. I just had a case like that last week, yes. And they are not embarrassed to stand up in court and say, yes, we're going to take his house, and he has no right to complain that we kicked the door down without a warrant because he wasn't living there at the time.
In fact, reporting your suspicions of your tenant's illegal activities to the police is cause enough to have your house forfeited because that puts on the record that you knew that there was something illegal going on.
Right. So
you can't show your innocence.
So you're in a catch-22 situation. Yes. So how does an ordinary citizen protect themselves?
You try to get the laws changed.
Right now, everybody is vulnerable. You can have your assets forfeited for making an incorrect statement on a loan application. Fish and Wildlife not long ago seized a tractor under EPA laws because it ran over an endangered rat.
Oh,
It didn't help the rat.
I heard about that. The Vietnamese farmer was tilling his land with his tractor. He ran over a kangaroo rat, and the government came and took his tractor. They tried to put him in jail for 2 years for running over a kangaroo rat. This is unbelievable. Do you know why I'm so mad? Do you understand what's going on here, guys? I mean, this is sickening. This is and it's our country.
If you are a member of a corporation and one individual in that corporation is indicted for instance, a money laundering operation, the government has a theory of tainted money, where his tainted money contaminates all your good money like a drop of ink in a glass of water. And so therefore the whole corporation's assets can be forfeited based upon the alleged illegal activity of one member.
What is this about legal fiction, that property has no rights so they can take it? How does that work? Can somebody tell me?
This is a very old concept that goes back to biblical times, basically. If an object, it's called deodond, if an object is used to kill a man, then like a sword is used to kill a man, then they would say, well, that sword was guilty and we're going to take it away from the owner and destroy it. And the owner's rights in it disappear. And they're using that fiction. It's a lie. A fiction is a lie.
But as an example, I heard about a man who lost his airplane because he said the airplane had no rights. It doesn't matter that the man owned the airplane. He said the airplane has no civil rights, so we can just take it. Or we can take his car, or we can take the money, because property has no rights, ignoring the fact that people who own the property have the rights of ownership. Right. That's the legal fiction, am I correct?
Right.
Explain to me about the 30 days, how that works. That you have 30 days to argue against the seizure, and if you don't do it within 30 days, that you can't get it back?
There's a very important part about that I think that you're overlooking. When they take your property, they could hold it for a long, long time and then send a notice out when you happen to be on vacation or whatever. You've got 20 days not only to file a claim, but to pay a cost bond of 10% of the value of the property in order to even fight to get it back. So in order to get a hearing, you've got to pay for it in advance.
But if they just took everything you own, how can you pay for anything?
Well, you're indigent, and of course you can't hire a lawyer, but because it's a civil case, you are not appointed a counsel.
So you have no money left to hire a lawyer. Correct. They don't give you a court-appointed lawyer, so you can't even fight back in the time allotted.
And the law is so complicated that the majority, I would say, of lawyers don't even know how to fight civil forfeiture.
This is unbelievable.
So people can't fight it themselves.
And which federal agencies have the power to do this?
Most of them. And that's the reason that most forfeitures, people abandon or give up their property or lose their property without ever going to court, without ever getting a day in court. They just lose it.
And though the precedents were set by drug laws, there are over 200 federal forfeiture statutes, and many of them don't even contain the exemption for innocent owners that the drug laws contain.
Where does the money go when they take it all?
The police get to keep it.
Whoa! Whoa! Wait a minute.
Not only
some guy calls up and says, hey, Russo over there is doing something wrong. He's sleeping with his wife or something. Okay? Sex is not allowed here anymore. Okay? And then they come and raid your house. They take all your assets, right? And then they get to keep them.
Nationwide, more than $433 million was distributed to state and local law enforcement agencies through the Department of Justice's Equitable Sharing Program last year alone. Civil asset forfeiture is a decades-old tool that gives law enforcement the power to seize property if it's suspected of being related to a crime. Though the procedure started with good intentions, which paved the way to hell, as a way to curb money laundering and drug trafficking. As I mentioned, we have money laundering and drug trafficking. Let's go to Gary Webb. With his Dark Alliance series of newspaper articles. He won a Pulitzer Prize exposing the fact that the CIA created the crack cocaine epidemic in the predominantly African-American neighborhoods of South Los Angeles and the Nicaraguan Contra fighters. And, of course, this happened during the Iran-Contra scandal when President Reagan and his wife were saying, say no to drugs, and they made the big speech about the 1988 Anti-Drug Abuse Act. were actually trafficking in drugs while they're telling everyone not to use them. This is the truth. This is what's real. Not what the phoniness that you're given by the mainstream media and politicians whose pockets are lined by these criminals to keep this little mafia going, the government mafia, to keep taking away the property of the people, to keep making the people dependent upon government resources and government aid. We have an out-of-control government and an ever-closing society. Recognizing the increase in structuring violations from Americans who unknowingly violate the law, the IRS announced last year it would only pursue structuring cases if the money was tied to a crime. And obviously that is absolute bullshit for what has happened to L&M Convenience Mart in Fairmont, North Carolina, and Mr. McLELLAN. Unbelievable. Then in March, the Justice Department announced it too, that it would only pursue structuring cases if the defendant had been charged with a crime or if the money was used for criminal activity. Race-baiting, divisive criminal, former Attorney General Eric Holder said at the time, appropriate use of asset forfeiture laws allows the Justice Department to safeguard the integrity, security, and stability of our nation's financial system while protecting the civil liberties of all Americans. Well, do you think protecting the civil liberties of L&M Convenience Mart? You think that the government's protecting the civil liberties of Mr. McLELLAN? Do you think the government is protecting the civil liberties of all of these cases? Do you really believe that? How many more lies? How many more lies? During a February 2015 hearing on civil asset forfeiture, IRS Commissioner John Koskinen was asked broadly about McLELLAN's case, in which there were no criminal charges pending or illegal activity conducted. If that case exists, then it's not following the policy, Koskinen said to lawmakers at the House and Ways and Means Oversight Subcommittee. Really? Do you think? Well, you have an absolute criminal, Holder, who's in contempt of Congress before he stepped down, and this just mafia just keeps continuing. And unless we, the people, rise up against this evil tyranny, we too will become victims. Sadly, this is but one aspect of the war on we the people. Asset forfeiture. Please do some research on this. Do your due diligence. Learn what is going on behind the scenes. It affects every single one of us. And the average American is completely unaware that we, the people, are being exploited and targeted by our own government. So where has all of this war on drugs left us? Well, the prison population is through the roof. Drug abuse is rampant. Heroin addiction is out of control in small communities nationwide. So the result of the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1988 is, after spending billions of dollars on law enforcement, doubling the number of arrests and incarcerations, and building prisons at a record pace, the system has failed to decrease the level of drug-related crime. Placing people in jail at increasing rates has little long-term effect on the levels of crime. But asset forfeiture has increased dramatically ever since. And not from drug dealers, ladies and gentlemen. Not from drug dealers, as I've just described. Research all of this information. Find your own truth. There is only one truth. Seek and you'll find it. You know, middle-income America, again, when Wachovia and Wells Fargo were fined a mere $200 million, none of their assets seized, for laundering $379 billion of drug money. Bank of America has been caught as well, all of the banks. Why do we not seize their assets? Why do we not demand that all of the assets of these banks be seized and pay our national debt? And, or better yet, distribute all the money. They want to have wealth distribution? Distribute the money to every American evenly. How about that? Civil asset forfeiture is a procedure that allows law enforcement to seize property if it's suspected of being related to officers from North Carolina's Alcohol and Law Enforcement, the Police Department, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and they were asking for him. When McLELLAN arrived at the store, he met two federal agents dressed in suits who asked to speak with him in private. McLELLAN led the agents to L&M's stockroom where they asked him if he knew of the term structuring. He had no idea. The federal agents then showed McLELLAN paperwork that included deposits to the store's accounts at Lumbee Guaranty Bank. The statement showed two deposits made within a 24-hour period totaling $11,400. The statements, they say, indicated he had a history of consistent cash deposits of less than $10,000, which is illegal. Then the agents told the small business owner something that shook him to his core and should shake all of us to our core. For most of his life, Lyndon McLELLAN had been in the business of country stores, the type of stores where the employees know the customers' names by heart and workers remain loyal for years and years. Business has been good for McLELLAN. "It's my livelihood," he told the Daily Signal. "This is all I know how to do. I'm 50 years old, and if I had to do something else, I'd probably be in trouble. This is what I was brought up in. This is all I know." What McLELLAN didn't know, though, was that the federal government could come in and take away what he'd worked so hard for. On a summer day last July, McLELLAN, who hadn't yet arrived at the store, received a phone call from one of the employees summoning him to the L&M. More than a dozen federal agents had flooded into his business or helped the feds in their basically to ultimately take this gentleman's savings. His business's savings, $107,000, is no joke. No joke. Structuring laws were originally put into place to catch drug trafficking and money laundering, but more and more instances have arisen where innocent Americans have committed structuring violations without even knowing it. For unknowingly committing a crime, a structured violation, the government seized all of the money in McLELLAN's bank accounts by using a section of civil asset forfeiture laws that regulate cash deposits. Now, I'm a little more concerned with the reason why they're going after, ladies and gentlemen, the federal government, the Internal Revenue Service criminals, had seized all of the money in L&M's bank account, $107,702.66. They even took the change, ladies and gentlemen. It's unbelievable, but this is what's going on in America. This is not an uncommon thing. Though he didn't know it at the time, McLELLAN committed structuring violations when making cash deposits of less than $10,000. McLELLAN himself doesn't handle the deposit. That's his niece's responsibility. And a bank teller had previously advised her to make the deposits of less than that amount. If cash deposits totaled more than $10,000, the bank had additional paperwork to file, the teller said. How nice. So the teller